Why choose a Sleep Number smart bed?
Can I make my site softer?
Can I make my site firmer?
Can we sleep cooler?
Sleep Number does that. Cools up to 8 times faster and lets you choose your ideal comfort on either side. Your Sleep Number setting. Enjoy personalized comfort for better sleep night after night. It's the final days of our Black Friday sale. Recharge this season with a bundle of cozy, soothing comfort. Now only $17.99 for our C2 mattress and base, plus free premium delivery. Prices higher in Alaska and Hawaii. Check it out at a Sleep Number store or sleepnumber.com today.
Sunday the 7th of July, and this is Doing the Thing. I'm Nathan Eckersley, and I'm here with ZARD Radio Media's Managing Director, James Gilmore.
Hello.
ZARD Radio Station's Current Affairs Lead, Lekhika Chaudhary. And ZARD Radio Station's Tamzin Kraftman.
Hi.
For this general election special, how are you all doing today?
Good, thank you.
Excellent. Well, if you're listening on ZARD Radio Station, where we do the thing live every Sunday from 8 p.m. UK time, you can get involved. You can tweet us or DM us on Twitter and Instagram using the handle @WizRadio. You can text us at no extra cost. Only standard network rates apply. That's 07807 183 538. Email us station@wizardradio.com, and all of our contact details can be found on the website at www.wizardradio.com. Now, it has been a pretty momentous week in British politics this week. How are you all feeling about the general election outcome? Tamzin, I'll come to you first.
I was actually not surprised in the slightest. I literally about 10 minutes ago was just having a conversation with my friend. I actually managed to predict every single party's outcome. I knew that the Lib Dems would do really, really well. I knew that the SNP would fall flat on their face, and I also knew that the crazy polls that were being thrown around with this supermajority, I just knew that it would kill Labour's voting outcome. I mean, yeah, they did really well, but I know we're going to speak about this soon, but the amount of people that actually voted for them was pretty poor. And actually, I think it was, and I hate to say it, but it was a large part to do with the press, because this confidence that Labour were going to do so well, it just meant that voters who were, going to vote Labour just couldn't be bothered to turn up.
Yeah, absolutely. Labour's vote share was fascinating, really, especially given that Sir Keir Starmer's just won this huge majority of 174 seats, but yet he actually won less votes than Jeremy Corbyn got in both 2017 and 2019. James, what do you make of the outcome?
It was kind of predictable. I was on a flight for most of the results coming out, so I kind of was boarding, and the first seats and the exit poll, I was literally in the airport as the exit poll results came out, and we were like, okay, this is kind of what I think we all thought was going to happen. By the time I landed, there were cabinet members being announced, people walking into Downing Street. So I do feel like I missed a lot of the fun and the action. Kind of predictable, but I'm worried that we might, as a society, take our eye off of the ball here, which is that actually the majority of the country hasn't voted for Labour, and there are some really, depending on how you look at it, concerning or interesting trends that could make the next general election, in whether it's 5 years' time or before then, a very different landscape if some of the trends we've seen in this election don't get addressed head on.
I will actually add to that. We have this statistic that 35% of people voted for Labour, but it's actually 35% of 60%, which is a very, very low number that I think people are kind of, not really focusing on.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a really stark statistic. I think when you actually compare it to the overall UK population, it worked out at something ridiculous, like just over 20% of the UK population voted for a Labour government, which is absolutely staggering. But I suppose what was particularly interesting when you look at the kind of votes to seats ratio is that, yes, Labour got this 34% vote share, but that's equated to 63% of the seats in the House of Commons, which is huge, and has obviously raised questions about the state of the voting system, certainly plays into the arguments for the Liberal Democrats, reform, the Green Party about introducing a more proportional system of voting that means vote shares are more closely aligned to seats in Parliament. What do you think, Lekhika?
I think it's interesting because I feel like this election is going to set the trend for a lot of future elections, right? I feel like this is the first time in a really long time our conversations are not just Labour and Conservative, it's every other party as well. With Reform getting 4 seats, but getting, I think it's 14% of the vote share, the third highest vote share, and then the Green Party getting a significantly less vote share, but they have 4 seats. So I talked about this on my show earlier today, and I think proportional representation is so interesting, but there are some negatives to it. I don't think our current system is going to work for us much longer. I think first past the post works a lot when we are a two-party country, and I feel like slowly but steadily we're slowly getting away from it. I don't think it will work for us much longer. I don't know if proportional representation is the answer, though. It might be, but it might need to be tweaked to match what works for the UK.
I would just...
that's interesting.
Yeah, I was just going to say that there's been so much conversation this weekend about the voting system. And I think what most people have said or come to the conclusion of is that, well, no winning party under first past the post is going to change the system that enabled them to win, especially not Labour when this has enabled them to win such a large majority. But also, we did have a referendum, and it wasn't on proportional voting, it was on the alternative vote in 2011, which there was just such political apathy about. There was no real desire to increase, no real desire in terms of turnout from people to even participate, and it got declined, the suggestion. And I guess a part of me is nervous about us re-legislating that and going through another referendum, because there were other referendums that happened around about the same time that had slightly more divisive impacts on our country. And I think if we allow that to go to a new referendum, it brings up the argument for other things that we voted on around the same time.
Well, just on electoral systems, I said something on my show yesterday, and it was a bit controversial, but I stand by it, which is that I know that first past the post, if you think about it from a countrywide perspective, it seems as if it's not representative. But if you think about it from a constituency perspective, the most popular party from every constituency won. And therefore, surely that's actually the most representative system. And yes, obviously, okay, the amount of MPs equates to who's Prime Minister, but surely the actual MPs that are in Parliament are representative of what the country wants because they are the most popular in that constituency, if that makes sense.
No, I completely agree with you, Tamzin, 100%. I mean, I've made the case for first past the post earlier on my show today. Really, it is kind of the ultimate leveller, because it doesn't matter what kind of politician you are, what your rank is in the system, what ministerial positions you've held, which party you represent. Fundamentally, you are accountable to your constituents and your constituents only. And there's no greater example of that than Liz Truss. She was a former Prime Minister. Obviously, her administration imploded, and that had a national impact. But what was fascinating was about the response on the ground. So there were a number of news reports from her constituency speaking to people living in southwest Norfolk. And they're saying that, she's been the Member of Parliament there since 2010. And they have seen her more in this 6-week campaign than they have in the entire 14 years she's been Prime Minister. And that's because not only has kind of her legacy as Prime Minister made an impact on her vote, but also she's just not been there for her constituents. She's spent more time kind of in the Westminster social scene. She's been going to the United States. She's been on the lecture circuit, things like that, rather than actually doing the job that she's paid to do, which is to be a Member of Parliament. And so her personal vote took a massive dent on that. And all of a sudden you've got a former Prime Minister losing their seat, which hasn't happened since, I think, the 1930s, which really is unprecedented for the modern era and hasn't happened for ages. I mean, similarly, you've got cabinet ministers of all levels who came either very, very close to losing their seats or just losing them entirely, mostly to the Liberal Democrats. And you've got the now former Chancellor of the Exchequer, Jeremy Hunt, retaining his very safe, traditionally Conservative seat by just 100 votes. Party Chairman Richard Holden, he did a chicken run from Northwest Durham to Basildon and Billericay. Basildon, one of the safest Conservative seats, and he won it by just 20 votes. Now, to me, if it proves anything,
didn't like it. In Basildon, the public were very vocal with the fact that they were not happy with him being there. And so, again, to speak controversially, I think he deserved to win by that very few amount, because he deserved to feel like he can't just move across the country and get things handed to him on a plate, surely.
Absolutely, yeah, and it showed a complete contempt, in my view, to his constituents in Northwest Durham, and also showed a complete contempt to the candidates in his own party. They had an entire selection process ready to go in Basildon and Billericay, and all of a sudden, he suspends that so he can install himself as the candidate. So again, there's huge questions to be answered about actually how the Conservative Party, and I suppose by extension other parties, respond to just installing their preferred person in a particular seat because they think they'll win. What do you think, Lekhika?
See, I have a slightly different opinion about this because of the area that I live in, or used to live in. I've moved now. The MP for the area that I'm in West London at the moment, is never seen. Okay, he's a Labour MP. He's a nice person, but you never see him. He does nothing for the area. I checked his attendances. You can see how many times they've been to the Houses of Parliament and voted on things. The man is never there. I don't know where he is, but he's not doing anything for us here, and he's not doing anything in Parliament. But he still wins because Ealing, Southall, is a very Labour seat. They're like, yes, Labour. That's all we're ever going to vote. But the people who, and I voted for him because I've not voted for him personally. In my brain, I've decided Labour would be the party that I'd give my vote to in the past. But what I think the issue with the current system is the other people who are saying that, okay, look, he doesn't represent us because he's never here. And the other people, the people who are like, okay, well, he's always going to win, let's just vote for him. Their vote doesn't get counted. I mean, it gets counted in the sense that it doesn't win, right? He wins, so nobody else wins. But I feel like there's a whole host of people who, just vote for Labour because they think Labour's going to win anyway, so there's no point, their vote doesn't count, or they don't go and vote. And that's my argument against the current system. I know the system works, right? Whoever wins, we've got 650 of the most popular people. But the people who come in second, I feel like are also equally as important because a lot of constituencies are very split. You guys are talking about places where people are winning by 100 votes or like 10, 15, 20 votes. And the current system essentially disregards them. And I feel like that's what a lot of people are talking about. And I feel like that's a conversation that has started this time around, but Labour needs to think about it because it's not going to go anywhere in the next 5 years.
I think, that's going to be Reform's argument as well, isn't it? That they came second in, I think it's in the end, over 100 seats, I think I saw, and have, very little representation. I think the problem is, and I think Tamzin, you highlighted this, is that we vote locally, and I'm almost kind of at fear of this shift that we've seen over like 10 or 15 years of politics becoming more about the national discussion and the Prime Minister. I mean, Reform ran a national campaign. Like, Reform's campaign was all about Nigel Farage. The people who did win seats, and even the candidates that came second, people were voting for Farage. They weren't voting for whoever the local representative is. I actually don't think that really helps anybody, though. That it makes us a presidential system on a campaign based on somebody who actually only a handful of people voted for. Only the people in the Prime Minister's constituency actually voted for the Prime Minister. And I think that it might be time for, as voters, us to just rethink. I ended up transparently voting based on local issues. It was so hard, I found, in this election to vote nationally. And it's weird that was my backup option. Okay, well, things I can't figure out a national opinion, I'll do a local one when we should be voting on local issues.
Yeah, James, I was just about to cut in and say that is what you should be doing. I don't know if this is a term that I'm now coining, but it is my election ick when people vote nationally. You should not be voting nationally. I'm sorry, unless you live in London, you should be thinking locally. I, for about 7 years until a few weeks ago, lived in a constituency, or actually a region, where the local politicians and what the local politicians want is so vitally important because it is a northern region. And therefore, the idea that I would vote for the MP that I thought would best value that constituency was a no-brainer. But you don't get this all over the country. As you said, Lekhika, there are some MPs that simply do not care about their constituency, and to them it is a ticket to the big house, or however you want to paraphrase it, and therefore maybe we need to be looking at reforms of ways that MPs can be more committed to their constituency. I don't mind saying where I lived. I lived in Yorkshire, which is obviously where Joe Cox had a seat, and so many other very influential MPs that are so committed to that region, and you can really feel that. You can really feel that, and therefore when it came to the MP that we all voted for, it was a landslide because there is a person there that has shown their commitment to the area. So maybe if we're speaking about reforms, it should actually be about the MPs and what they need to be required to do in order to retain their seats. But I'd be very interested to hear what people say about that.
I was just going to say I agree. And I think because I've moved out of London now, so my new constituency is in Buckinghamshire. But my current one, which is the one I've lived in 18 years, I feel like because we're on the outskirts of London, we just get dobbed in with everybody. And they're like, it doesn't matter what happens to these guys. They're on the edge. And I feel like it's the same for a lot of the borderline constituencies. And the only one that people cared about was Boris Johnson's one, which is down the road from me. And everybody else doesn't matter. And I feel like that's the same thought process a lot of the MPs had. And so a lot of people just don't bother voting here, that's my election ick. It's like, why have you not voted, please, honestly? But I get what you're saying. And I think a lot of people don't realize that the idea is to vote for your region and forget what's happening everywhere else. I mean, we've talked so much about the tactical vote this time around that I feel like people voted very differently. But I feel like going forward, people need to think, this is the area that I'm most likely going to be spending at least the next couple of years in, if not 5. Who do I want to represent this area? And I feel like not a lot of people know that. And that links a lot to a lack of political education. People don't learn about things like this. And it's so important for this to happen, for education to happen. And some schools are starting to do it. Some schools don't do it at all. And I think you can't blame people because they don't know anything. They're like, what do you mean first past the post? They're like, what's representation? What do you mean? What's the difference between an MP and a councillor? And nobody gets it. So I feel like it all just starts with whatever changes are going to happen, they'll happen. But it all starts with informing people. And I feel like education is, I personally feel like we should study political science in school, but that's just me.
Yeah,
I definitely. And yeah.
No, Nathan, after you.
Oh no, I just want to pick up on something you said, Tamzin, actually, about the importance of vote local, not national, because I think it's easy to forget it's a general election. We're voting for our member of parliament. So as a bit of a story, I spent election night at Stockport Town Hall at the election count there. Now, one of the constituency I was kind of assigned to for the count was Hazel Grove, which for the Liberal Democrats was number 1 on their national targets list. There and Cheadle. Now, the Liberal Democrats won both of those constituencies, but Hazel Grove was fascinating because this was a place which had a Conservative Member of Parliament, William Ragg. We kind of know about William Ragg now, but he'd represented the seat for a long time. He was actually from the constituency. He was born, raised there, went to school there, all the rest of it. And, people had started to have enough of him. But at the same time, Conservatives had a brilliant, dedicated candidate there. Again, he lived in the constituency, he knew the issues, but yet the trend was very much towards the Liberal Democrats, and the candidate they had been the Lib Dem candidate for the last 4 elections as well. So again, she was very well known. But what was remarkable was the fact that on the doorstep, canvassers were saying, well, yeah, but I can't stand what the Conservatives have done in government, and the Lib Dems are the best chance here, so I'm going to do that. They may have liked Paul, who we had as our candidate, but they didn't like Rishi Sunak and the Conservative government that he'd input in. So my role on the election count was data entry. So we had people stationed at each table representing a ward. They would come back to me with a sheet with a tally on their kind of rough estimates as the votes were being tallied. And it became quite apparent to me quite quickly that the Conservatives were going to come third. And, once I'd got all the sheets in, worked it out, it was obvious about an hour before they'd made the official declaration, Conservatives were third. So, it's not just about saying to all those canvassers, those volunteers, those activists, your work's kind of been for nothing. I'm also telling people they've lost their jobs, which is an incredible thing. And you have to be absolutely certain before you make that call. But yeah, it just shows how important that local connection is. But as I said, when we come back, we'll be talking about another issue which we've discussed, which is the role of Reform UK in the next Parliament. So don't go anywhere. We'll be back after this.
Welcome back, everybody, to Doing the Thing, where we are discussing all things politics and general election today. So earlier we were discussing the current political system, but now let's have a discussion on what was I trying to say? No idea. On reform, on other parties besides the two main ones that everyone seems to be talking about. So Reform has won 5 seats, but they came in second place in over 100 seats. Is this something that we should be concerned about? Let's go to Nathan. Nathan, what do you think?
I think that it's not so much concern, but taken with caution. Maybe that's semantics, but I think with Reform, I'm of the view that they're going to be very much a kind of flash in the pan, and they're not really going to last the course, especially with Nigel Farage. I mean, with Farage, he's been open about the fact that he can't stand the day-to-day duties of being a member of Parliament. He's said he can't think of anything worse than spending his Fridays stuck in Clacton, and that's the seat he now represents. He initially didn't want to stand as a member of Parliament because he thought the elections in the United States were far more important than what we were having here. So already we've seen the fact that he's coming in to the House of Commons with kind of a half interest. He's doing it because it's a platform. And I think we'll get that with his other Reform MPs. I mean, Richard Tice, a very successful multimillionaire businessman in his own right, can we see him wanting to spend his time in Boston and Skegness? The same with Rupert Lowe, another very successful businessman, a former Brexit Party MEP. Will he want to spend his time in Great Yarmouth? And I mean, I guess the kind of person to buck the trend on that is James McMurdoch, who's just won in South Basildon and East Thurrock. He's very much a local guy from the constituency, lived there all his life, and he's been elected as the Reform MP there. So I guess there's some kind of difference there. But certainly with the main four, and of course Lee Anderson as well, really defying the odds to retain Ashfield after defecting from the Conservatives. So I'm of the view that I don't think they'll last the course. Maybe I'm out on a limb on that, but I think certainly with the leadership of Reform, they're not going to like the actual responsibilities and duties of being a Member of Parliament. Just the platform, being on the green benches and having those 2 letters after their name will give them.
If I'm honest, I don't even think we need caution. I honestly think we have nothing to worry about. I do have a few reasons. It's not just all based off of my emotional response. So I'm sure you guys all know, or maybe you don't, but Lib Dem came second in 70% of seats in the 2019 election. Yes, okay, they've done particularly well this time around. I will have to say, I think a large part of it, and actually the reason why Reform also have a lot of votes is simply because people couldn't stand the Conservative Party. I think after they take these few years to regroup, re-strengthen, come out with a really good manifesto and put a very good person in charge, all of these people that voted Lib Dem and Reform are going to go straight back. And I don't think they're going to have a second thought. I will say, I mean, I know I said that there is no caution. There's obviously the concern that a lot of people have about migration and immigration. And obviously, I'm not surprised that Farage used quite scary tactics to convince people to vote for Reform by talking about the boats and talking about the need to be very strict with migration. And that is a concern, but I'm fairly confident that the only reason why Reform and Lib Dem did so well is because of how poor the Conservatives have been over the last 12 to 14 years.
Go on, James.
I was just going to say off the back of Tamzin's thought there, I would be concerned only about how the major parties might respond to this, because the last time Farage pulled off not quite a coup like this, but when Conservative MPs started defecting, that's when we started to see David Cameron do the Brexit referendum, and we started to see how this actually small group of people influenced national policy, and that's ultimately had an impact on our country for decades to come, Brexit in particular, and that directly came from the amount of support that Nigel Farage was able to rally up and how he was able to really scare the Conservatives. So I'm personally not worried about Reform taking over number 10 or Nigel Farage being Prime Minister. I think that's highly unlikely. What I am worried about is about a Labour Party who are very different from Labour parties of the past, in that one of the critiques of them in the election campaign was that they agree with a lot of Conservative policies. And if this is a party that, despite the fact they're in number 10, is still trying to shape their agenda and their image, and there's this big threat of reform, that either Labour or the Conservative Party, who will be going through their own identity crisis, will either absorb reform or allow themselves to be influenced into, I think, some really unpopular policies and ideas. And I think that's one of the things that Farage is really good at. And Nathan, you might disagree with me on this. I think Farage is really good at making it look like more people care about an issue than they actually do as a percentage of the country. He gets so much media attention that, and I don't think a lot of the people that voted reform this time did so because they agree with their policies. And I think kind of, Tamzin, that's what you're saying as well. So I think he's able to make a single issue a massive deal, and you end up with actually some quite unrepresentative policies and decisions in the major parties as a result.
I mean, he's very famously a one-issue politician. That's his entire career, is having one problem and sticking to it. It does make me laugh about the fact that he says he doesn't want to be in Clacton. I mean, he's been trying to be an MP for about 40 years, and the fact that he doesn't want to do it, and yet he's tried so hard, it's just very weird to me. It really is.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And if I may, just to follow on from James's points as well, I mean, I think, yes, Reform have come second in nearly 100 odd seats. But actually, when you break it down in vote share, they only actually came within 10% of winning a seat in just 6 constituencies, which is pretty staggering, considering they ran this massive national campaign, a campaign which was really targeted on, as you say, particular issues as well. To have won 5 seats and come within 10% in just 6 areas shows where reform failed, but also where UKIP failed in 2015. Because in 2015 UKIP got 3.9 million votes, whereas Reform this time have got I think it was just over 4 million.
Yeah.
UKIP 2015 got 1 seat, which ironically was Clacton, but this time they've got 5 seats as well. So they've obviously learned from that mistake. But one of the other worries, I guess, with Reform is how they respond to other parties. I mean, yes, there's the concern about a potential merger with the Conservative Party, depending on who succeeds Rishi Sunak. I'm not convinced that would happen. But the other thing as well is Labour's already been sending its cabinet and front benchers out to kind of badmouth Reform at every available opportunity. You had Jonathan Reynolds on Laura Kuenssberg this morning, who, by coincidence, happens to be my local MP, going out and talking about how awful Reform are and saying they're this, they're that, they're the other. But that just feeds into the argument of saying, oh, well, the establishment's out to get us. And so there is a really fine balancing act, I think, with how you actually deal with Reform. Yes, it's fine to criticise them, but criticise them on the policy and the platform and the ideas, and not necessarily on the personalities, in my view.
No, I agree. And I think one other thing that is worrying about Reform, I get what you guys are saying, and I do fully understand, is the impact it has on people's attitudes. I've already had some absolutely horrific conversations with people about immigration based on the fact that they voted Reform. And I know that that's just going to go further. we had a shadow poll in our office in the firm that I work for, where they asked us all to vote, and they wanted to see how our firm would vote if we were the Houses of, the House of Commons. And it went mainly Labour, and then the Tories were in second place, which was to be expected. And then a bunch of people voted Reform, and the whole office was shaken, right? Like everyone was like, "What? How even are people voting Reform?" And it started these huge conversations and some really horrible conversations about immigration. And I've had the same conversations with a lot of people. So I think even if they are going to be very influential when it comes to the government, I feel like one problem that happens, and it happened with UKIP and it happened with Brexit and it's going to happen with Reform, is people's attitudes. And I've already seen them change because I've talked to so many people about it. And that's my worry. So I'm great at arguing with people. I love it. That's my cup of tea. It's why I'm a lawyer, right? Like I love it. But not everybody can take it. And so I worry for a lot of people I know who are immigrants, who are migrants, because I wasn't born here. I moved here from a different country. I would count as a non-essential immigrant under Nigel Farage's campaign. I love that for me. But I know so many people who will be told things and they'll take it so personally. And I feel like attitudes are my bigger worry rather than on a much more, political national scale. That's what my worry is. 4+ million people voted for Reform. That's a lot of people, and I'm sure a lot of them, like you guys are saying, it was a protest vote. It was anybody but the Tories. I agree, but a lot of them are very staunch believers. And I'm not saying that immigration is not a big issue. It's going to bring up a lot of hard conversations for a lot of people. That's what my worry is.
Not to kind of focus. Sorry, James.
No, Tamzin, after you. It's fine.
I was just going to say, not to kind of refocus the conversation on immigration and migration. I think that the fear that you might have, regardless of what we feel about the existence of the Reform Party, is so valid. I mean, this country is... it is the way it is because of migrants, because of immigration. I mean, I am the great-granddaughter of both migrants and immigrants. And, it's crazy to think that there are so many people that look a certain way towards those that, either weren't born in the country or whose family weren't born here. And it's not until you take a step back and realise that it is the country it is today because of it. And it's not something to be scared of. It's absolutely something to embrace.
I think to shift the conversation away from immigration for a second, and to go back to Reform, I've got a poll up on my phone, which showed, I don't actually know which poll it is. It's not credited on this screenshot, which I saw on Instagram. So this is very reliable, but it shows voting intentions in general election in the United Kingdom as of July 3rd by age group. And it showed that for 18 to 24-year-olds, 10% of them intended on voting for Reform. By comparison, 8% intended on voting Conservative. Unsurprisingly, 47% Labour, 8% other, 14% Green, 15% Lib Dem. So Reform's share of the 18 to 24 vote is more than its share of Conservative and just under its share of Lib Dem and Green. Not all of that is going to be from immigration or a single issue. I've also heard lots of stories that have been messaged into the station this weekend of people saying that at their schools, when they've done mock elections, Reform has done really well. And I think that a part of this, I think I always have to take, particularly under 18, there's a shock factor to it. I could 100% have seen myself, somebody at school, who for the shock of it all would have done something like that. Would I ever vote Reform? No. I think that is a thing that happens in schools, though. But there is also a part of this that, this is the generation that grew up and has had a serious issue with Andrew Tate. And, a lot of these kind of controversial opinions on social media that really, get a lot of engagement amongst young people. That's also what Reform speaks to. And that's, Nigel Farage, the man who said that he understands Andrew Tate and resonates with him and some of the things that he says. So, I think as some of those people in 5 years' time are voting in an election, I think there's just something interesting. And I guess the next, whether it's 5 years or less, will tell time will tell what the party looks like. I did, not to shift to the conversation, but Tamzin and Lekhika, you've both shared your election icks on the show. Nathan, I'll just say my election ick. I think I agree with both of you, but I resonate with Lekhika's about people not voting, but specifically as somebody who is often surrounded by people who are very outspoken on politics and then don't vote, and they come up with all sorts of reasons. Every reason that, by the way, is answered by just spoil your ballot. At least you've shown up and participated and you're counted.
Exactly.
That's a big one. But Nathan, what's your election ick?
So I agree with all three of you, but my election ick is something that, I don't know, maybe it's very particular to the Northwest where I'm based, or certainly the North of England. But people voting a certain way because their parents and grandparents did. So I can see you all agree. So something I get, particularly in my area, it's Greater Manchester. It's a real Labour country. You knock on someone's door and they say, oh, hello, my name's Nathan. I'm from the Conservative Party. I'm canvassing on behalf of this person. Would we be able to count on your vote? I said, no, I don't vote Conservative. Okay, may I ask why? Well, my dad voted Labour and my granddad voted Labour and my great-granddad voted Labour, so I'm going to vote Labour.
We have the same thing.
Yeah, that to me is just I mean, not only is it a lazy argument, but it's lacking in kind of individuality. It just lacks in everything. People should be able to make up their own minds. Just because your grandfather, your father, your whatever descendants voted a certain way, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to agree with those same ideas. If your father likes Jeremy Corbyn, that's not necessarily going to say that you like Jeremy Corbyn or Keir Starmer. You might like Sir Ed Davey for the Liberal Democrats. But, I mean, I could rant about this all day. But that is my big election ick.
No, I agree with that. That can be my second one. My area, every single person is like, yeah, we vote Labour because everyone in our family votes Labour. What does that even mean? What do you even mean by everyone in our family votes Labour, so we're going to vote Labour? Like, that's not... It just,
Can I just to me though, this is the argument for lowering the voting age, because I think Tamzin, it might have been on your show yesterday, that somebody said it's not just something that young people do. There are people of every age who vote, who are uneducated about the reason they're voting, or vote because that's the way their parents have voted. And actually, like, people use that a lot for the argument against lowering the voting age, but actually, like, I don't think it is.
So I will just chime in because, as James might remember, last week I spoke to Emmeline Pankhurst's granddaughter. If you don't know who she is, she literally gave the votes to women, or she fought for the rights for women to vote. And I spoke to her great-granddaughter. And she dedicates her life work to lowering the voting age. Like, that's her thing. And not only is it so beautiful that she's carrying on her great-grandmother's legacy with that, she came with some very valid points, because at the very beginning of that conversation, in my mind, I was thinking, there's no way that they're going to give 16-year-olds the vote. And actually, it was kind of inspired by a conversation I'd had with you, James, a few weeks ago. And you spoke about how Gen Alpha are more polarised than ever. And in my mind, I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't want them to get the vote. That's terrifying. But actually, when a 16-year-old has the vote, or even when you're 12 and you're told, okay, in 4 years' time, you're going to get the vote, that will encourage people to speak about politics. It's going to encourage schools to make it more of a thing on the curriculum, because it gives younger people the power, and therefore they don't want to see these donkey votes, as we've been speaking about before. We don't want to see these apathetic young people who are just going to vote for what their friends want to do, or whatever they think is the trendiest party to vote for. They're going to vote for what they actually believe in. And unfortunately, amongst young people, voting Conservative is not very trendy. And regardless of my own or your own opinions of the Conservative Party, there should be a freedom to vote for whoever you choose, regardless of if it's a cool thing to do or not.
I agree. And I think we'll see if the younger people get the vote, and we'll have to see how they vote. But trends will be a very big part of that. And that, guys, I think we will be right back after the short break, where we will discuss more about the election, and maybe we'll take a look at polls and their impact. We'll be right back.
This is Doing the Thing on Wizard Radio, and for this week we are talking all about our general election special, because you might have been living under a rock, but it has been the general election. I mentioned it at the very beginning of the show, but I had a bit of a gripe with these prediction polls. I personally think they destroyed the outcome of the election. It removed any sense of people actually wanting to fight for what they want, because they thought that it was going to be handed to them on a plate. So obviously people have very different opinions about opinion polls. They are very, very important. There is a reason why we have this momentous countdown to the 10 p.m. on election day. Well, James, I'll start with you, not to throw you off. What do you think of opinion polls? Should they be a thing of the past?
It's interesting. I don't think they should be a thing of the past because, it's useful for the parties and the candidates to know what's going on. And I think if you are a politician running in an election nowadays, as much data as you can get is the better. I think, and maybe this is because this was a very kind of compressed 6-week campaign. Every single day, new polls and prediction polls being released. Sometimes multiple a day from different sources and different news outlets. You're always going to get these very extreme polls. I mean, there were polls that suggested that Reform would do better than the Conservatives. I think I saw a poll that was like, actually, Reform's going to form the next government. So there's, you're going to get the extreme sides of it. I think that if there's one thing that we've learned is that as a society, we have so much impact on what the media prioritizes and what they report, because media companies are just going to put out what they think we're going to engage in. That's how the model works. So I think it's kind of on us all to care less about opinion polls, to care less in a way about the national picture and more about the local picture, like we spoke about before. And then maybe it will stop this obsession where we're getting push notifications on our phone about a kind of prediction poll, which actually does nothing. And I think if you are the Labour Party, they will be attributing some of this popular vote loss that they've experienced. They didn't lose the popular vote, but they didn't get as much of a turnout and support as they wanted to the polls as well. So I definitely think that they're never going to go away, and nor do I think should they, but as a society, we need to prioritise them less.
It's interesting what you say about kind of the importance that the media have. Nathan and Lekhika, I don't know if this is public information, but I work for a very big broadcaster outside of Wizard Radio, and therefore I've had a very immersive view of this general election. And I will say that these opinion polls very much controlled what we put out into society. The second that we heard about this supermajority, it was the focus of discussion for the whole day, if not the whole week. I mean, do you think that there should be more rules on what the media can or cannot report in terms of these opinion polls and how it actually might sway people?
So, I don't know what happened there. So I love me an opinion poll, but if I see another one for the next 5 years, I might cry, because all I've seen everywhere, I have all of the apps on my phone and I sort of regret it. But like James said, there were so many all the time. And the thing is, they're good. We need them. They show data. They give us information. You see a range. You can see who's released what they're, do your analysis and whatnot. But the fact that we talked about it so much, and like you guys have said, it did impact results so much. I had clients come into the office, into my office to meet me the day of the election. I voted in the evening, and they were talking to me about how so many people they know weren't going to go and vote because they were like, oh, Labour's going to get a supermajority anyway. That's what all the polls say. And I'm like, no, that's not what the point of these polls are meant to be. They're meant to give us an indication, but they were just... And I'd rather they be present and they can be in a top right corner of Sky News, BBC News, all of these, and that's it. Not throw it in our face, because you're right. They then end up impacting what, of course, news broadcasters talk about, and then you end up getting very skewed coverage where you just talk about one thing. So if there's something that we can get, it should be even coverage. At least the two big parties or the big 4 or 5 should get an even amount of screen time. It'll be hard, obviously, as things happen, but at least that should be the aim. And then if one party gets, a couple of % more, a couple of minutes more, it's fine. But when we heard the word supermajority, I swear I heard them in my sleep for the next 3 days. Like, that's all I heard. It was actually insane.
Which is also insane because that doesn't exist in this country. Just saying, that's an American term that's been brought over for this election. Nathan, what do you think? And then is one more thing I want us to talk about before we run out of time.
So I have two problems with polling. The first one is over the last few years, they've not been correct. And the second one is that polls have been weaponized recently. So on the points about them being incorrect, let's take this general election, for example. Okay, so Labour's vote share is prediction. So polls showed at the highest level, Labour are expecting to win a poll to win 48% of the vote. At the lowest, they were expecting 35% of the vote. They actually finished with 33.8%. So that shows just how the polls were out for this election. But going further back, 2015, they expected David Cameron to have a second hung parliament. He just about won. 2016, they expected that Remain would win by a landslide. We left the European Union. 2017, Jeremy Corbyn was going to be Prime Minister. Theresa May had a hung parliament. 2019, Boris Johnson was going to lose his seat. He wins an 80-seat majority. So, we've seen time and time again that polls have been inaccurate. Yes, they're a great indicator on the national mood, but they should not be the main way of deciding. And that leads me on to my second problem with polling, which is the weaponization of them, and particularly this election. So perhaps those of us who are a bit more online than others will have seen Carol Vorderman had set up this website about how to tactically vote if you want to get the Tories out. And it gained huge widespread popularity, and it was being used to say, well, if you look at these MRP polls were the big thing at this election about how you can break it down seat by seat by seat by seat, saying, look at the polling here. If you vote this way, you can get the Tories out by voting, even if it's a Labour area, you vote Lib Dem. And, things like that. And so that's why polls have been used to weaponize the voting system. And actually, that's a huge danger for democracy, in my view. As I say, polls are a great indicator of the national mood. They are good for giving us an idea on how parties are doing, what people think about certain policies. But in my view, they've become far too prominent in our political discourse, in our political culture. And we should, like with election debates, which is a whole other issue, be sent back to the United States.
Okay, I think we have time for just one more question. We've covered so much and yet so little. So I think without much debate or discussion, I'm interested in knowing what's the one thing that everybody on this show thinks that the Labour government needs to prioritise in this term. Let's say the next 5 years, to be snappy with it. I'm going to go, I think we should go like Lekhika, Tamzin, Nathan, and then I'll do my one.
Okay, I think there's a lot. I won't get into all of it, but I think crime is very important to me. It's very personal to me as well. We've, in my local area, lost a lot of, there used to be police patrolling the streets when Labour was last in government. I've not seen a single police officer in the last 8 years. And as someone who lives in London, antisocial behaviour, all of that is very prominent. I think if there's one thing besides some of the biggest issues that we're obviously going to talk about, I would like to see crime and reducing that have a big focus. Maybe that's a very London issue, and I don't even live in London anymore. Maybe that's a very London issue, but I would like to be a little bit safer when I walk the streets, basically. That would be nice.
Tamzin?
For me, it's absolutely about improving the strength of the pound, lowering inflation. I want to see our money go further. I want to see mortgage rates go down. I want to see, the idea that a young person can buy a house. I want that to be our future. I don't want it to be some sort of far-fetched fantasy that we can all buy a house and live a happy life. So for me, it's absolutely about gaining control back with our economy.
Nathan?
Housing. Absolute number one has to be housing, because I'm going to plug a fantastic report by a group called Works in Progress, which is the housing theory of everything. It is a wonderful, brilliant articulation of how housing impacts every single aspect of our lives and our economy. And just very quickly, some stats. The UK has a backlog of 4.3 million homes. It will take 50 years to even fill the government's current target of building 300,000 homes a year. If we want to tackle the problem sooner, it would require 442 homes per year over the next 25 years to be built, or 654,000 homes per year over the next decade in England alone. That shows how much of a huge hill we have to climb on housing, and I really hope that the new Labour government can get to grips on that.
My one, I want to actually echo Tamzin what you said, because I agree with the economy and particularly like inflation massively. My big one, if I had to pick one, would be the NHS. And I think that Labour can actually do more reform within the NHS than the Conservatives could, because people don't trust the Conservatives with the NHS. And actually, if you were going to have a government that were willing to take a fresh look at the NHS and reform it and make it much more efficient so that when you go to A&E, you don't have to wait 8 hours. I think the state of the NHS is a point of national shame, and it should be a point of national shame. And I think actually if it's realistically a choice between the Conservative or Labour to lead the country, Labour are the ones who have the most permission from the public to do something about it. So, yeah. But Nathan, I'll pass on to you to lead us out.
Yeah, thank you very much, James, and thank you to Tamzin and Lekhika as well. I'm afraid that is all the time we have for doing the thing today. As I say, thank you very much, James, Lekhika, and Tamzin for joining us. Where can our listeners find you? I'll go in order of how I can see you on screen. So, James.
Well, anything I work on is on Wizard Radio, so wizardradio.com and all of our social media.
Okay, Lekhika?
I host a show every Sunday at 12, and it's all things current affairs, so do tune in for that.
And Tamzin?
You can find me from 12 to 1 on Wizard Radio on Saturday. We take a deep dive into the biggest social issues that young people face, and also because I'm a bit of a music nerd, I'm also on Wizard Radio on Sunday talking about the songs that are the key to our lives.
Fantastic. And you can find me on Wizard Radio every Sunday from 3 p.m. or on the Nathan Eckersley podcast, talking about all things politics, current affairs and news. But remember, you can catch new episodes of Doing the Thing live on Wizard Radio Station every Sunday from 8 p.m. UK time and on all podcast platforms from Monday morning. But until then, we'll see you next week. Goodbye.
We all know those GLP-1 injections work wonders, but that price tag almost gave me a heart attack when my insurance denied coverage. I was staring at a choice between paying my mortgage or paying for weight loss. Talk about a rock and a hard place. Then I found Elevate Health compounded semaglutide at just $58 with payment plans that don't require a second mortgage. Same medication, same results, but a price that real folks can actually afford. Visit joinelevate.com today. That's JOINELEVATE.com. Your wallet will be as happy as your waistline. This medication is not FDA approved.